Welcome to the Americas Table, hosted by the Georgetown Americas Institute. My name is Muni Jensen, and I'm hosting leaders from the region who have transformed their vision into reality. Our guest today is Juan Gabriel Valdés, longtime Chilean politician, diplomat, author, and twice ambassador to the United States, one of the most steadfast advocates of democracy in Chile and Latin America. He helped advance the return of democracy to Chile by leading a communications task force in the 1988 national plebiscite that led to the ouster of dictator Augusto Pinochet. After spending the early years of the Pinochet regime in exile, he returned to Chile with an MA from Essex University and a PhD in political science from Princeton University, and then helped run a campaign that urged citizens to vote against extending Pinochet's rule in favor of holding an open presidential election. He served as the new democratic government's first ambassador to Spain, the lead NAFTA negotiator for Chile, and the Foreign Ministry's Director of International Economic Relations before being named Foreign Minister in 1999, when he advocated successfully for Pinochet's return from London to Chile for prosecution. Later served as Chile's permanent representative to the UN and ambassador to Argentina, later appointed to the UN Secretary General's Special Representative to Haiti. Ambassador Valdés worked for think tanks in the US and Mexico, including the Institute for Policy Studies, and has taught at a number of universities, including the Sorbonne. He's also a member of the Global Leadership Foundation and the author of several books, including Pinochet's Economists, the Chicago School of Economics in Chile. Ambassador Valdés, welcome back to Washington. It's a pleasure to have you back here, and it is also a pleasure to have you here at the Americas Table.
Thank you very much, Muni.
So
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you for coming, and I want to start by the most recent development, which triggered your return to Washington. On March 11th, Gabriel Boric, a 36-year-old student organizer who was a leader of the student protests in 2011 and later a critic of the government's response to the civic unrest of 2019, has become president of Chile. You've been in diplomacy and politics and involved in Chile for a very, very long time. And in a conversation we had recently, you said you were ready to step down. What motivated you to come back to Washington, join the Boric government, and develop an agenda in Washington? And in the answer, I would like to know, what are your main topics with the United States government?
Well, I think that Chile needs a change. We had in 2019 an enormous social explosion, which showed the level of exhaustion that the society had with the type of economic model and social policies that we have followed for years. And even if change had been introduced before in other governments, I was a participant. I realized that there was a ceiling that we had reached, and we needed a change, not just in policies, but also in a generation of politicians. And I was very impressed by this new generation. I had the opportunity of discussing with them, of talking to them. Some of them are the age of my sons and daughters. Some others are even younger than my sons. But when President Boric called me saying that he needed me to represent him in Washington, I didn't hesitate. I think that one needs to support a government that is democratic, is extraordinarily well-oriented, and has the challenge to confront the main problems that Chile and the region is facing by now. Therefore, I decided to come back to Washington, and I'm very happy to have had the opportunity of doing that.
What is your agenda with the U.S., the priorities of Chile?
I think that the U.S. and Latin America have to reestablish some sort of permanent coordination, some sort of permanent discussion. One cannot organize relations between two parts of this continent just by organizing summits each 3 years or 4 years and then forgetting about the whole thing. I believe that there are many things that we ought to do together, particularly when we're facing situations like the impact of a pandemic, the impact of a war in Russia and Ukraine that is producing enormous effects in terms of food production and in terms of energy in Latin America, and a situation in which we need to coordinate to confront climate change. Therefore, my agenda is to try to level the quality of our relationship.
And what about what is happening in Chile? I'm Colombian, and Chile has always been kind of the poster child for sound economics and for a fast-growing economy, but it has not resolved the issue of poverty and inequality. So what is missing?
During 30 years of democracy, Chile has been able to develop a very efficient economic system. In fact, we were recognized by that in the world. But this system was able to raise the level of the sea, but with the same dimension of the boats that were floating there. Therefore, even after 30 years of growth, development, in which many people have been incorporated into society, into universities, into new education and health, people feel that the inequalities are such that, and Chile is one of the most unequal societies in the world, that development in reality doesn't reach them. Therefore, they want more change, and we have to face the necessity of a redistribution of income in the country as soon as possible, because if not, the democratic system and life in community is threatened.
This is actually affecting all of the region, and what is happening recently in the electoral cycle is very interesting. Some people refer to it as a new pink tide, as we have left-wing governments being voted in Colombia, in Chile, in Argentina, possibly in Brazil again, and in Peru, and among others. Even Colombia, which has been kind of a holdout for a long time. Are you hopeful that this shift to the left will create new lasting opportunities, maybe some integration, or what will it just continue the not failing to fill the needs of the population?
I understand that it's simpler to believe that what we are seeing in Latin America is just a turn to the left. I think that it is a turn towards government that realize that people need more health and good health, that people need better education and public education, that people need new pensions and real pensions and not simply financial agreements between different companies, that they need to confront the problem of climate change, which is dramatic in our region. They need to face the problem of the water, which is private in Chile and is creating enormous problem in our rural areas. Therefore, I think that these governments that have this vision, it is true that they could coordinate themselves and could present, and in this case, in the relation with the United States, could present to the United States a program of work in which both sides would be involved in a constructive manner and not in a confrontation. I think that what is remarkable in this situation is that these governments that are, you can call them pink tide or left-wing governments or new governments or type of democratic governments, don't want a confrontation with the United States. They need to work together with the US. And this is new because in the traditional left in Latin America, the first idea was that the definition was anti-imperialist and therefore the definition was anti-American, if you want. I think this new situation gives an opportunity to the United States that I hope that the US will seize.
Do you have hope for regional integration in Latin America in any front? It seems that we've been notoriously failing in trying with integration.
We have failed horribly, and the reality is that all the organizations that we are founded in the last 30 or 40 years have disappeared. The last one was Prosur, but before that was UNASUR, and the OAS is in a pitiful state. The IDB has not been financed, and therefore it's not being the actor that we would like to have in the region. Therefore, we need to discuss this situation, and I believe that the summit allowed the opportunity for exchanges in which these topics were touched. I think that's a good start. Now, after the summit, we need to really perform and be able to coordinate and work among ourselves to create new structures of integration that are not necessarily for everybody at the same time and are not necessarily big bureaucratic structures, but are permanent dialogues that can create new types of coordination and produce new results for the people of our region.
There's something that always has struck me as very difficult to solve, is the dichotomy, and it's very evident in the relationship with the United States, the dichotomy between the human rights and the security teams. And if you ask the citizens in Latin America, in any city or rural area, after jobs and after their livelihood, they're concerned about security. And it has turned into a political battle. Those who advocate for human rights, those who advocate for a greater security policy. And we are all invaded with organized crime, drug trafficking, all kinds of insurgents. Is there any way to build a bridge between those two agendas so that they're not Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, left, right?
This is what we are trying to do in Chile. In fact, as you know, we are facing enormous challenges, both in terms of organized crime in the cities, but also a situation of confrontation in the Mapuche area, in which the confrontation is not with the Mapuche people, but is with groups of armed people who have relations with traffic of lumber and also drug traffic. And this violence cannot be confronted without considering human rights, and at the same time without considering efficiency in terms of being effective in terms of security and in terms of intelligence. And I think that our government in Chile has come to understand very well that situation, the complexity of performing with whole respect to human rights, at the same time being extremely severe in the defense of the rule of law and in the defense of security for common citizens. But I fully share your point that it has been in Latin America extremely difficult to combine both.
Is anyone getting it right, or is that just a widespread problem?
I think that we are learning about that, and we are learning that. I saw that in Spain. I was ambassador in Spain when the Spanish government was confronting the challenge of ETA and the Basque terrorist groups. And I saw how sometimes it could manage to perform with respect to human rights, and some other times the problem was that an emphasis in security and in the use of the security forces led to a violation of human rights. This is a very difficult path, and it establishes very dramatic moral tensions in society. But I think that you have to go that way. There is no other way but to respect human rights and at the same time be effective in terms of security policy and the application of law.
Let's talk about China. The last time you were ambassador to Washington, I don't think that the footprint of China in Latin America was as large as it is today. It's been an unprecedented amount of trade, of investment, of presence of Chinese companies and Chinese influence in the region. And then it seems like the U.S. is kind of lagging behind in its engagement, both in infrastructure projects, in developing strong relationships with Latin America. Is there a danger of Latin America becoming kind of a proxy continent for the struggle between the U.S. and China?
I believe that most Latin American countries keep and want to keep a good relationship with China. We have a trade relation with China, which is absolutely important to us because it is our main client, and we have had a long time of relations with China, diplomatic relations. We haven't seen any sort of intervention in our internal politics. We haven't seen any sort of authoritarian approach towards us or a political induction. At the same time, we understand very well that there are values that we do not share, that there are levels of respect to human rights that we do not share. And we are in a continent and in a region in which the relationship with the United States is paramount in that sense. Not only with our neighbors, we want to develop a Latin American policy and we want to associate ourselves strongly with our neighbors, but the point is that we don't want to get caught into a confrontation which reproduces a Cold War between China and the United States. We would like to keep our trade agreements and our trade relations with China because they are very positive, but we don't want to be seen as countries that are leaning towards a different attitude in matters of human rights or in terms of respect for representative democracy. Therefore, it is a situation we observe with a lot of attention. But up to now, we haven't had a problem with any one of these actors in terms of the management of our own development.
One last question about the region, and then I want to talk about your story. Are you hopeful or are you fearful for Latin America in the next 10 years?
I'm hopeful, but at the same time, I realize that the threat towards representative democracy is real. That we have the threat of extreme populism in the region, that the challenges to democracy that we are seeing now in the United States and that we had never seen before at this level are also challenges to us in Latin America. What happens in this country in the future will be decisive to the permanence of democracy in the region. I want to say that as a first point. A second point is that these governments that are progressive governments leaning towards change in social conditions, are governments that represent a deepening of democracy in the region. If they fail, the possibility of a comeback or a reproduction of authoritarian governments we have seen elsewhere and represent populist values and a type of authoritarian perspective is a real threat. Therefore, I'm optimistic in terms that we have the opportunity to consolidate democracy and to deepen democracy, but if we fail, I have to observe very pessimistically that the alternative will not be a democratic one.
I hope that is not the path that the continent follows. I want to talk about you and your relationship to Washington. You have very strong ties to the city, which began as a young professional during the Allende years, where Ambassador Orlando Letelier was tragically assassinated not too far from here. And you have a story that is linked to that tragic killing and some subsequent kind of inspiration, or it must have shaped your career in some way. I'd like you to tell us about this.
I come to a city in which I have a sort of fraternity. This fraternity is the group of people who were 26 years old around that date, 76, when Orlando was killed, and who worked with Orlando or were related at the time with the Institute for Policy Studies and the fight against Pinochet in Chile. And therefore we continue to meet, we continue to see each other, and I think it's a moving story, this group of people who have continued to see each other after this tragedy and became, as I said, as a fraternity. The city, I've known it since then, since the 70s, and I've seen many things in this city. I was here for during the Watergate scandal, and I saw the whole thing on TV. It impressed me a lot, and to think that I come back to the city in a moment in which the first thing that I have to do is to look at new hearings on TV on a situation which is even worse than the one I saw in Watergate, impresses me. At that time, I was so proud and so enthusiastic with American institutions. Now I'm so concerned about that I feel that even if I will always represent Chile, and I feel very honored to represent the Chilean government, and I understand very well what my duties are, I feel an enormous affection towards this country and towards Washington itself and its life, its politics.
Do you think it's inspired your career as a diplomat, as a politician?
Yes, because Orlando Letelier was a very important influence on me. Of course, my father was very decisive. My father was Minister of Foreign Affairs and was President of the Senate of Chile during years and decades, and therefore I had a strong motivation to be involved in international politics and to study international politics, which is what I did here. But I have been also involved in politics in Chile for a long time.
Did somebody tell you don't get involved in politics? It's a terrible career. Don't go that way. Study something else and engage in something else. Or did you, or your family and your colleagues?
No, I never. No, on the contrary, I think that my family was very much involved in politics. Probably my mother always told me that I should get more involved in international politics than in national politics, in local politics. But it is true that if I look far away in my family, you will find one politician after the other. Then it was normal.
So it's inevitable.
Inevitable up to a certain extent. One possibility was to be a politician. The other possibility was to be a musician. Because my mother was a musician, my brother is a very distinguished orchestral conductor, therefore we followed the lines.
Any regrets? I'm going to the other side of
No,
side of music.
I studied cello for 10 years, but then I left it.
So you took the right path.
Yeah.
Let's talk about leadership. And we've been talking about Latin America and the different kinds of leaders and the absence sometimes of a retreat of democracy in the region. When you think of leadership, do you think of a person? Do you think of a concept? What is your idea of leadership and specifically?
There is one thing that I have learned in politics in a long life now. Leaders are those who can reunite opposite views in a society. Leaders are those that can invite the possibility of a society to unite. Leaders are those who can mobilize a society behind certain objectives that are seen by society as a necessity. Therefore, I don't participate of the admiration of strong personalities that can transform things just by their personalities, but people who can develop a speech, a discourse that can motivate people to join them into a common and a collective endeavor. This is what we saw during the concertación in Chile. And this is what, in fact, this new government is attempting to do. I've seen President Boric understand that issue in a very clear way. He is inviting the society to join and not to divide itself. He is not polarizing society, but on the contrary, he is trying to represent the whole of Chile in a movement which is risky, which is challenging, which is difficult. We are building a new constitution. We have tried to canalize the violence that exploded in 2019 into institutional reforms and not to simply work on the confrontation in order to win momentarily a type of authority over the society. This is enormously valuable, I think.
So what encouragement would you give to Georgetown students and students around the Americas who are interested in politics and policy?
Well, the first thing is that it's difficult because I was a student once and I was a leader at the university where I was studying also at the organization of students. And I don't think I was attracted by visions of rassemblement, of reuniting people. I was more attracted in the idea of following ideas and trying to lead the society behind these ideas. We are facing challenges today which are so terrible that can threaten life on Earth, and are threatening life on Earth. We are not facing the sort of challenges we faced. We simply face the challenges of destroying our liberties and freedoms, which is very serious. But what we are facing now is a challenge towards life on Earth. And therefore, the idea of allowing oneself to be hedonistic and come into a state of simple veneration of an ideology, following ideas that I prefer, is not sensible, it's not reasonable. What one has to do, first of all, and I saw that when President Boric came to see me when he was a deputy long time ago, and he came to my house, I was ambassador in Washington, he wanted to listen. He wanted to understand what was going on in this country. And after listening a long time, he said to me, could you recommend me books on this? This was his attitude, and I think that this attitude is important for young people today, to listen, to reflect, and to be able to confront poles and extremes in society, because what you need is to create the broadest front confronting the threats that are challenging society today.
Final question. You've been a scholar and you have been very, very close to academia in many times of your life. Do you think it's time to change the way we teach leadership, the way we teach politics, to include these new concepts and these new challenges?
Yes, I cannot say about the United States, but I can say it about my own country. I think that the idea of, I don't know if you know, but the first thing the dictatorship did in the period of Pinochet, when they came to power, was to suppress all courses on civic education. Besides, they appointed military and admirals as president of universities, but that's another thing. I think that people should discuss on politics and on the challenges that are now present to society since they are very young, since their first age. I think that people ought to be informed about what is going on in their lives and not present as abstract perspectives the type of difficulties that are confronting society today. I think that this training since youth in the possibility of debating, in the possibility of understanding what is going on around them would create better citizens and would provide society with better leaders.
Ambassador Juan Gabriel Valdés, thank you for joining us at the American Table. It's been a very real pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mani.